These are the saddest of possible words, Tinker to Evers to Chance. Trio of bear cubs and fleeter than birds, Tinker and Evers and Chance. Ruthlessly pricking our gonfalon bubble, making a giant hit into a double. Words that are heavy with nothing but trouble. Tinker to Evers to Chance. Hi there, I'm David Rapp. I'm the author of Tinker to Evers to Chance, The Chicago Cubs and the Dawn of Modern America. I'm a journalist who started out in sports, but migrated to politics early in my career. I returned to sports writing in retirement to research this book on early baseball and how it became the national pastime. Come along with me now to see how three teenagers from very different sections of 19th century America made their way to Chicago. They formed an iconic double-play combination. Their names have been immortalized in the second most famous poem about baseball. But what's more important and surprising, they established one of the great dynasties in sports history. In the process, Americans of all stripes found common bond and no small measure of liberation in the game of baseball. I began work on this project a few years ago, well before the Cubs made it back to the World Series for the first time in my lifetime. As you may have heard, 1908 was the last time the woe-begotten Cubs had won a World Series before their return to glory in 2016. That was 108 years in between celebrations. Those early Cubs, believe it or not, were a baseball dynasty, unlike any other in American sports. From 1906 to 1910, they won 4 National League pennants and 2 World Championships. In fact, they won more games in that 5-year stretch than any other team in baseball history, before or since. That's right, Yankee fans, look it up. The cornerstones of the Cubs dynasty were 3 rather unassuming infielders who came from very different backgrounds and regions of the country. Slick fielding Joe Tinker at shortstop, little Johnny Evers, the highly strung, take-no-prisoners second baseman, and player-manager Frank Chance, known as the Peerless Leader, stationed at first. Though well known in their day, none of them were superstars like contemporaries Ty Cobb, Christy Mathewson, or Honus Wagner. But their partnership in Chicago lasted for 10 whole seasons, a rarity then as now. And even before the end of their great run, their names would be canonized in a short poem dashed off on July 12, 1910, by a New York newspaper columnist named Franklin Pierce Adams. FP's sing-song chant about this great double-play combo quickly worked its way into the American vernacular. The phrase, like its namesakes, came to signify a kind of smooth and ruthless efficiency, a catchphrase like slam dunk is used today. Tinker to Evers to Chance, problem solved, task completed, job well done. Joe Tinker, Johnny Evers, and Frank Chance all grew up in the 1880s and 1890s, but each boy drew from very different family and life experiences. Evers came from the industrial city of Troy, New York, more specifically from the Irish-American enclave of South Troy. His family's immigrant Catholic background shaped his anger and abiding drive to prevail over the city's Anglo-Saxon elite. Tinker was raised in Kansas City, in the lower-class home of an unwed mother and itinerant stepfather. City leaders were jumping aboard the burgeoning City Beautiful movement to relieve an overcrowded urban jungle. They built a string of public parks for kids like young Joe to get outdoors and play ball. Chance, meanwhile, grew up way out west, in Fresno and the vast Central Valley of California. He absorbed the pioneer ethos of his parents. His father and mother had each traversed the country as children on the Oregon Trail. Son Frank would always be known for his iron determination. These 3 young men came together in Chicago around the turn of the century. Chicago had doubled in population to 2 million people over the previous decade. Immigrants from Europe and rural America flooded the streets in search of jobs in the stockyards and factories. Baseball became a common denominator in this melting pot of languages and ethnic cultures. The Cubs, along with their South Side rivals, the White Sox, were the talk of every saloon and street corner. When the 2 Chicago teams faced off in the 1906 World Series, The entire city went bonkers. Men, women, and kids, people of every ethnicity and income group, idolized their favorite players and clamored for any baseball news they could get their hands on. They piled into the West Side grounds, where the Cubs played in those days, often drawing SRO crowds of 20 to 30,000 to a ballpark that only held 10,000 in the seats. This was 20 years before the invention of radio, so if you couldn't get a ticket for a big game, you might be out of luck. But you could still watch the game on the street corner. This crush of humanity at the corner of Madison and Dearborn are craning their necks to the side of the Tribune building. They're looking at a contraption like this, a scoreboard of electric lights set up to recreate the game in real time with pitch-by-pitch and play-by-play accounts, fed to them by a Western Union operator sitting behind home plate. As the Cubs' winning ways continued, baseball entered the bloodstream of American popular culture. Tin Pan Alley publishers discovered that baseball-themed marches and jingles were surefire bets to sell their song sheets. In 1908, shortly after the Cubs had won their second consecutive World's Championship, lyricist Jack Norworth and songwriter Albert Von Tilzer came up with the #1 hit of the year. The following season, newly elected President William Howard Taft rolled through Chicago and wanted to take in a ball game. When he stood up to stretch his legs in the middle of the 7th inning, the entire crowd rose with him. Joe Tinker, Johnny Evers, and Frank Chance are now all enshrined in the Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown. They were voted in together in 1946, still joined at the hip. Some have questioned their individual credentials for Hall of Fame recognition. In fact, they were simply 3 ordinary young men who found a paying job playing a game they loved as kids. That they were the undisputed leaders of one of the great teams in history, present at the creation of baseball's emergence as the national pastime, is reason enough to celebrate their great accomplishments. I'm David Rapp. Hope you enjoyed this quick overview of my book. It's available from University of Chicago Press, through your local independent bookstore, and on Amazon. There you'll find plenty more stories about these ball players and their times, a window into a pivotal moment in our nation's social history. Thanks for watching.